I'm terrible at introducing people, as I said. You know, I know that Lynette's you know, is an amazing contributor to Learn the Birds in many ways, and to birding in South Africa in general, and especially to birding by sound. So I'm going to hand straight over to you, Lynette, and you can take it away, and I'll shut up and turn off my camera.
Thanks, Derek. I'd like to welcome all the members in the Zoom group, and also live streaming on YouTube. It's actually really great to have such a big turnout. I'd also like to welcome many overseas members to this group. I see there's some from England and some from Canada, which is really great. Please let us know where you are from. If you aren't from South Africa, it's great to have you with us. I'm also very excited to have 3 guest speakers. They're all friends of mine. Etienne Marais is very well known in birding circles, a very good birding guide that takes birders all around Southern Africa. Then we have Tim Cockcroft as well, a very renowned bird guide in the Eastern Cape. He does birding tours around Port Alfred, Alexandria, Grahamstown, and Hamburg. Very good at bird call IDing as well. And then we have Rick Nutall, who is very passionate about bird calls and bird call recording, and he's based in Bloemfontein. He also has a business that takes people around like a bird guiding business and nature adventures as well. So it's birds, butterflies, insects and plants and all that. So it's very good to have 3 very distinguished bird call experts as my guest speakers. Okay, birding by sound. Problem, okay. That's the next slide. I grew up on a farm. I was very privileged to have a lot of bush around the farmhouse where we lived. Our farmhouse didn't have a fence around it. If you walked out of the front door, the back door, the side door, about 20 meters or 40 meters, you were in the bush. And I had 2 older brothers, and I spent a lot of time running around the bush with them, and the farm workers' kids as well. So we all grew up very fluent in Xhosa. We really loved nature and being outside. We learned the birds' names in Xhosa first, and the plants, the trees, reptiles, mammals. And I still speak Xhosa fluently today. And I remember from a young age, we didn't always know the names of the birds in Xhosa. So we sort of used to make up names. And I remember the red-eyed dove. They still call it that, is Makulu Sipis Dudu. And that is the onomatopoeic sort of version of its call. It's what it sounds like. And the Xhosa still use that name today. It's old lady, where is the porridge? That's what it means directly translated. And the green woodhoopoes were Tchagrer, which means laughing women. And they still use that name today because they do sound like cackling and women laughing. Fast forward a few years, I became a teacher, a foundation phase teacher and a preschool teacher. I taught for many years. When I moved to Grahamstown about 26 years ago, I actually ran my own preschool for 12 years. So I enjoy nature. I always have. I've always preferred being outdoors. And then when my younger daughter finished school, I decided now I must find a hobby to do. And because my husband used to play tennis every Saturday, and he was often away playing league tennis. So I joined the local bird club, and that's where I hooked on actual birding and going like on special trips to bird. Whereas before, if I went to a game reserve, I would look at the birds there, but not actually go actively birding. And well, I got hooked very early on. And one of the first people that I birded with was Tim Cockcroft. He's a speaker tonight. And a real birding legend, Justin Nicolau. I'm sure all the Southern African birders know him well. And it was absolutely mind-boggling birding with them because they birded by sound. They'd hear a bird say, that's an acacia-pied barbet, and then they'd see it. So they basically first birded by ear and then by sight. So I have always birded like that ever since I started, because that's the way I was taught by these two, what I consider experts. Sight and sound was always like one. It's part of being a bird. I can't understand how some people don't bird by sound and are only visual birders. I find that quite strange because that's not the way I learned to bird. But anyway, fast forward a few years, then I started a business making tactile books for blind children, because one of the children in my preschool was blind, and I worked on finding ways to stimulate her. And one of the ways was like auditory stimulation with sounds, everyday sounds and that. And we used to go on nature walks with my preschool, and then I used to point out sounds and bird sounds and all sorts of things to her. So I have taught blind kids as well. And her parents were both blind, and I spent a lot of time in their home and I saw how they functioned. And I've often wondered if birding for the blind would be a good thing, because they could learn the auditory, the bird calls and the bird sounds. And when that little girl was in my preschool, I took her and her mom and, well, the whole school group to the local museum, and they've got stuffed animals there and birds, and they could actually feel them. They could feel the African penguin and know how big it was, and what it felt like. It hasn't got like long feathers like a hardy-dar's got and all that type of thing. So that's a thing to consider in the future, is maybe organizing birding for blind people, auditory birding. Okay, from very early on, I birded a lot with Tim Cockcroft. I still do. And he has recorded calls from very early. I think he was a teenager recording, but he will speak about that. I won't talk about that now. I started off obviously with a camera with a long zoom lens taking photos of birds, but I soon had the need to actually record calls, because Tim was recording. He had a digital voice recorder, and I thought, well, I carry this little Canon camera around with my other birding camera. I might as well put a microphone on it. So I bought this very good Rode Mic Pro, very good microphone, and it has a dead cat, which is really essential for the part of the world where I come from, because it's always windy or there's always a breeze, and it affects your recordings. But the problem with those were those recordings, I had to record on movie mode. So it was MP4, and then I had to download it onto my computer and then change it to MP3 before I could edit on Audacity. So that was a bit of a schlep, and it also ate a lot of my computer space, all those MP4 recordings. So after a few years, I progressed onto the Olympus digital voice recorder, which I still use today. It's a very good one. I bought like a middle of the range one. And I bought a Boya directional mic, very good little mic. And it also comes with a dead cat, which you really do need for the windy area where I live. And the recordings are not bad at all. I'm quite chuffed with it. That middle photo was taken by Rick Nutall, then Hanover, we were, Tim and I were recording melodious larks. They were very high in the sky. It was early in the morning, and they were doing their very high flight display calls with lots of mimicry and that, and it was really awesome. And you can see we didn't need the dead cat, so you get very clear sound from that. The right-hand picture, I've just recently bought a Broden parabolic mic. The quality is astounding. It is so crystal clear. And I'm very chuffed with it. My recordings have improved in leaps and bounds in quality. I use it when I go on like special recording sessions when the weather's right and I have my car nearby, because it's not a mic I can sort of drag through the bush. So if I'm going to be walking through thick bush, I take the middle setup with me. Okay, most people are visual birders. They bird watch. And if we've got good eyesight, 20/20 vision, then yeah, we prefer to see a bird. And we are so spoiled these days because we don't only have bins or binoculars, as we call them. We also have spotting scopes, which is really good. It brings very distant birds close up. And we also have digital cameras with zoom lenses, which are also basically optical aids. I use mine quite a lot and don't use my bins as much as I should, because I find it quite a schlep carrying so much stuff. I also carry a small video camera around, so I'm like a Christmas tree with things hanging from me when I'm walking in the bush. So we are very spoiled. We're all very visually orientated. And this is a photo of a group of us Eastern Cape birders on the Swartkop flats near mud flats near PE at about this time of the year, when the waders were coming into breeding plumage and about to head north to the northern hemisphere. Okay, now here's Tim showing us how to listen properly to birds. You cup your hand behind your ear, and it definitely enhances your hearing. If you go birding next time, put your hands behind your ears when you're listening, and you'll see it really helps a lot. So that's a kind of auditory aid that you can use in the bush. We all have hands. Yeah, and we should all be listening more to bird calls, trying to find the bird that is calling, and not only visually see it, but so often we hear a bird long before we see it in the bush. Okay, last week I did a survey in 2 of the groups, in the Eastern Cape Birding Facebook group and in the Southern African Bird Calls group. I asked them, how did you learn bird calls and bird songs? And as you can see here, most people said by hours in the field. They learned their calls from spending a lot of time out there in the field. And I quite agree. The more you're out in the field, the more you will learn. The more calls you will hear, the more you will see birds calling and which bird is calling. So as far as I'm concerned, nothing will surpass that for learning bird calls. Birding apps, we also spoiled these days. We live in a very technical era where there's cell phones with bird apps. There are so many here in Southern Africa, and we're quite spoiled. And I'm sure overseas as well, our Canadian and UK members listening tonight, I'm sure you have the same thing. And we are very lucky that like an app like Roberts here in South Africa has very good quality bird calls and a variety of calls. It won't just have one song. It might have, you know, 2 or 3, and then like regional variations. So yeah, we spoiled. Some people said birding with pros, with the experts, and I agree. ever since I started birding, I've birded with very good birders. As I said, Justin, Nicola, Tim, Joe Barmer, and many others. I've also been on bird tours with some excellent bird guides. So I've learned a lot about birds, bird calls, and IDing birds from their calls. And some people make up mnemonics, which is like a rhyme to the bird song, like I am a red-eyed dove. And I learned that at the bird club, at the local Grahamstown Bird Club, to do that. And it definitely helps, because at one stage I couldn't remember the calls of the red-eyed dove and the Cape turtle dove, which is now called the ringneck dove. And just to remember that rhyme, I am a red-eyed dove, that helped me remember those two. Some people in the survey said if they hear a bird, they try and find it, which makes absolute sense, especially in your garden. We'll talk about that garden birding soon. Yeah, it's good to hear and see, and then it reinforces the auditory memory if you see and hear at the same time. And some people said they've learned a lot of calls from Zenocanto. Now, if you don't know what Zenocanto is, it is a website with bird calls from all over the world. There are quite a few represented from South Africa. We've got quite a few recordists that are quite prolific recordists, and I think most of the birds have been recorded from Southern Africa. And that's a very good resource. You can download the calls for free, put them on your phone and learn them that way, or load them onto your computer. Okay, I won't go through the others. Well, some people said Guy Gibbons CDs. That shows how old they are, but Roberts has Guy Gibbons calls now, so that's where they are. And then the very last section is all of the above. Now, I think that is, most of us, we don't only learn from hours in the field, we learn from apps, we learn from pros. So it like encompasses a whole lot of these categories, not just one. Okay, I enjoyed this saying. I had to add it to this slideshow. Birding in tropical forests by sight alone is like watching the news on television with the sound turned off. You will miss most of what is going on. And that is so true. If you can't hear the sounds, and I know there are birders that have hearing problems because of older age. If you can't hear, then, you know, your birding's so much less richer if you're only birding by sight alone. And I know a few older birders that realize their sight isn't, I mean, their hearing isn't what it used to be, but they're hesitant to go and have their hearing tested and wear hearing aids. And I can never understand that, because when our sight goes in our 40s, we have our eyes tested and we get glasses to wear. And I feel I've taught children with disabilities, and really, if you can get something to enhance your hearing, you must do it, even if it does show. And I mean, the hearing aids these days are tiny. You know, they're not huge like they were long ago with, like, you know, like big batteries and all that. Anyway, these are habitats that would require auditory birding. Now, the top left one is the Eastern Cape thicket, and I bird a lot in that type of habitat. You will always hear birds long before you see them in that thick bush. And sometimes it is so thick it's impenetrable, but it's rich in bird life, and you don't often get to actually see the birds, but you hear them. And standing where I took this photo from, it's like in a valley, and in the early morning, you can just hear bird call all over, and it's great to know the calls and know which birds are there. And when you atlasing, you so often hear a bird but never see it. And that is why it's so important to actually know the calls, so you know which birds are there. Okay, then the top right, montane or coastal forest, I think that habitat, forest habitat, is the most difficult because there are normally plenty of birds, and you normally spend your time with your head looking up, so you get birders' neck much of the time because the birds are in the canopy and they're normally tiny birds, but they're all calling. So if you know the calls, you'll know which birds are there, and that's quite important. Then bottom left, vast reed beds. Now I'm thinking of like reed beds like at Macaneta in Mozambique. If you've ever been there, those reed beds go on for miles. They are so vast. But there are plenty of birds there. And if you don't know the calls, you won't know what birds are there. So another example of how important bird calls are to know. Then I'm sure you're all wondering what this weird habitat is bottom right, open sky. How many times have you been like in the Karoo, for instance, and you're walking along and you can't see birds in front of you, but you hear birds above you, directly above your head, and you look up and you can't see a thing. It's like the clouds are calling or singing. And those are normally the cloud scraper cisticolas. They fly extremely high. They're doing these, do the flight display calls very high up in the sky. And if you really look carefully, it takes me ages to actually see them. And they're normally a dot in the sky, and there is no way you will ID them by sight. But you will ID them by call, because each one has a specific call. So that's why I've included open sky. And it's not only the cisticolas that display up in the sky, melodious larks do as well, and they can do it quite high up in the sky. And they often mimic as well, and they go on for ages. I've also seen eastern clapper larks doing that, the crew, what they call the cruise display flight. Also quite high up in the sky, and it can last quite a few minutes as well. Okay, now you'll understand why these cisticolas are so hard to ID, even visually. There are 5 of them, cloud scrapers they call them, and they all occur in Southern Africa. For someone who doesn't have a trained eye, they all look alike. It's only the pale crowned. I didn't have the right photo for to illustrate this, but the female would have a streaked crown as well, and the male in non-breeding. So he would look more like the others. But as I said earlier, they all have their own distinctive call, even though they look alike. And obviously, habitat would also play a part in IDing them. I'm just going to play the zitting and the I'm going to play the zitting call. As you can hear from those 2 cloud scrapers, cisticolas, the zitting and the cloud, they have their own calls that are not similar at all. It's only the cloud and the wing snapping that are quite similar, but if you learn them, you'll know the difference. Okay, so many people ask me, how do I start learning calls? Where do I start? I always tell people, start in your garden. That's the best place. Start in your backyard, maybe with the dawn chorus, where lots of birds are singing early in the morning. The sound carries further because it's cold and it's normally quieter. The humans haven't started making a noise with cars and all that type of thing. And try and find the bird that's singing. Creep up on it, try and see which bird it is. And once you know the birds in your garden and the calls they make or the songs they sing, it's a good base for going deeper in your neighborhood, wider, and then, you know, it's good to start in your own garden. Now, this olive thrush lives in my garden. I've recorded it so many times. It's got so many different calls. In this video, it'll start with its song, the dawn chorus song. It's a beautiful song. And then the second part of the video, it throws in like some trills, some weird trills, what I call embellishments. And then it does like a alarm call and also a flight call. Okay, there you could see, you know, the different calls it makes. And that's how I have learned bird calls. Even when I'm sitting at my computer or I'm at the dinner table, I can hear birds outside. And, you know, my ears are quite tuned into any new sound that I haven't heard outside before. And I normally go running out with my recording equipment. Okay, now we're going to talk about mnemonics, that is making up rhymes to help you remember bird calls, like rhymes to their songs. As I said, I am a red-eyed dove, to try and remember the red-eyed dove song. Okay, from that short video, you could hear the red-eyed dove and you could see that it calls with its beak closed. most of the doves do, which is very weird. Then the work harder of the Cape turtle dove or the ring-necked dove. And some people have said to me, they say mampara. So that's quite a joke. And then the Deirdrix, he sings his own name. So that's it. Okay, now some birds are named after the kind of sounds they make, like the chats. I think the word chat comes from the English chats. It sounds like they're chatting, and we have chats here in South Africa as well. I'm going to play the buff-streak chat and the ant-eating chat, and you'll see it does sort of sound like chatting. And then the babblers, you can't mistake those. They sound like loud babblers. Tinkerbird, it sounds like a tinker banging on his pots. Stonechats, you will hear it sounds like stones knocking together, pebbles. But the African Stonechat also has a beautiful song as well, like chat-like song. And then the blacksmith lapwings, that's a very apt name for them because their warning call does sound like a blacksmith hitting a hammer on an anvil. Okay, then there are the onomatopoeic renditions of calls, like the cuckoo got its name from the sound it makes in Europe, the European cuckoo or common cuckoo. It sings cuckoo, high note and a low note. In the African cuckoo also sings two notes, but they're both on the same pitch, like cuckoo, as you will see here on my slideshow. And then the hardy-daw, believe it or not, its name comes from its call. It sounds like it's singing hardy-daw, but from my call, you'll have to use your imagination a bit. Then the Swee Waxbill, it sings its name, Swee. That's where that name comes from. And Tchagrer, Levaillant named it a Tchagrer because he said it sounded like Tchagrer. And I've got quite a good recording that illustrates that exact call from a southern Tchagrer. Then African hoopoo, the hoopoo is the onomatopoeic version of the call. Then the grey go-away bird, I've always thought that's such a strange name for a bird, but it's very descriptive because it literally says go away, as you'll hear. And then the book mimicry as well, it sings its own name, and the southern boo-boo sings boo-boo. Okay, now to find resources on the internet, I've got a YouTube channel with over 600 bird calls. I normally have a still photo with a sound call recording that I've made. All the photos are taken by me. So you can hear the clip and see what the bird looks like. I try very hard as well to get actual video footage of the bird calling, which is even better. So if you want to look at my channel, there it is under Lynette Rudman. Okay, then Zenocanto, as I spoke earlier about, is a very, very good website with bird calls from all around the world. There are quite a few recorders from Southern Africa, so we have quite a good collection, I think, from our area. The female Cape Rock thrush featured here was a recording I got, and they want recorders to record more female bird calls. Okay, so that's a good option to look for calls. The Southern African Bird Calls group I started a few years ago. It also features bird calls only. If you post a photo, you must post the call with it. So that's a group you could join if you live in Southern Africa. As I said, we're very spoiled with field guides and phone apps. Robert is brilliant. I spoke about it earlier. Got very good bird calls as well on the phone app. Cecil is, they've just revamped their field guide and their app. And the field guide has got something unique. They've got a barcode, and you download an app which scans the barcode for each bird and plays the call. I think that's a very cool thing. And their cell phone app's also very good. Bird Pro app is also highly recommended. There's one for Kruger and South Africa, and they're working on a Southern African one. Also got quite good bird calls. Some of my calls are in that app and in the Sassel app as well. Okay, now, what is the difference between songs and calls? We'll quickly flip through them, and then we'll have our guest speakers. Songs are normally melodious phrases, and they're longer. Calls are normally shorter, and calls have a purpose, like alarm call, contact call, begging call, and such. Okay, and then birds make other sounds as well besides singing and calling. I can think of the wing clapping of the Clapper Larks, the Cape and the Eastern Clapper Larks. Then there's drumming by the woodpeckers. Then there's bill snapping as well. I'm thinking of grey-headed Bushshrike. And I've just added at the end of this quick video the cork popping sound of a black-bellied bustard. Really weird sound. I know the Ludwig's bustard also does a similar thing, and the denims. Okay, now we will have Tim on to give his talk. Tim can tell us when he started birding, when he became interested in bird calls and recording and all that.
Yeah, I was only about 9 years old, and I noticed this medium-sized brown bird flying around, going zzz, and it was flying past all the time, so I didn't really get a good look at it, but it looked sort of dovish. And my dad at the time had a rabbit, and although he wasn't a birder, every family had a rabbit, and I had just acquired my first bird book. This one, The Birds Around Us by Jerry Brookhazen. And the calls, all I had was call descriptions, literally, and I had to just have a look at the call descriptions and see what went zzz, and there were about 1 billion different, well, not literally, but several different call descriptions with a lot of Z's and a lot of Z's and all that, but nothing really seemed to match what I saw. and or none of the descriptions of the birds that went zzz. And I eventually found out that this bird going zzz was a red-eyed dove, and that fascinated me as a 9-year-old. I realized there was a dove that didn't coo, and in my looks, in my searches in the bird books, I found out there were owls that didn't hoot, and ducks that didn't quack, and cuckoos that didn't cuckoo, and all sorts of things like that. So I was curious as to what was going on, and right around then I discovered a program on the radio back in the mid-80s. This was 1984, 85. By the name of Talking of Nature, which had a panel on, and the ornithologist on the panel would play 2 bird calls every week. And that I was very interested in. And how I learned the bird calls was not so much what bird is making that sound, although that definitely was part of it. I would see a bird in the book and I would wonder, what sound does that bird make? And the written descriptions weren't quite cutting it for me, but I would listen, and as soon as the panelist would announce what birds he was going to play for the week, I would quickly look them up in my other bird book. By then I'd acquired a Sinclair's photographic guide, and I would read the call description along with the playing of the call. And in between, there were other radio shows that used to play these old records of nature sounds and that, like Nature's Melody and Tony Pooley and all those recordists back in the day. And for Christmas 1985, my parents gave me a set of 3 Len Gillard tapes, which had 511 bird calls on it, 511 species, which was at the time the most comprehensive of a bird collection. And I used to just spend weekends listening to these bird calls. I mean, I was a kid. I didn't have much opportunity to get out in the bush and all that. So I just used to listen and listen and listen. And by the time I got out in the bush and that, I knew these sounds. I remember my first trip to Kimberley. I got most of my 23 lifers up there in 5 days were picked up by sounds that are of birds that I'd never heard in real life before, but I remembered them from the tapes. So yeah, I mean, it was a matter of that. And as I was saying, I would always wonder, what sound does that bird make? Now, in some instances, it was both sides at the same time. I was always wondering, what sound does a red-fronted, well, back then it was called a red-fronted tinkerbarbet. What sound does a red-fronted tinkerbarbet make, the Tinkerbird? And at the same time, I was hearing this, and I did not know what this bird was. And I was trying to look up at the sounds and all that in the written descriptions. And when I got my Len Gillard tapes and it came to the red-fronted Tinkerbird, oh, that's what it was. So what I wanted to know and what it was and what I wanted to know what it sounded like merged. And there were a few cases like that. A Klaas's cuckoo was another one of those examples. I wanted to know what bird that was, and I wanted to know what sound a Klaas's cuckoo made, because in its written description, it was just written as witjay in the old bird books. So I couldn't really figure that out, but eventually it happened. So that's basically how I got started.
Tim, yeah, that's very interesting. And can you tell us how you started recording and what equipment you used?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I started recording because I was hearing all these sounds on the radio, and that it just inspired me. It was something I wanted to do myself. And my late dad, long before he was even married or anything. He and his brother used to have an electronics shop in Port Alfred, and he sold these Philips tape recorders, which were some of the first compact portable tape recorders to come out in the 70s, 60s, 70s. And these tape recorders were interesting in that they did not have a built-in microphone. They only had an external microphone jack, and they had separate recording and playback volumes. So you could set your recording volume to quite a high sensitivity on the microphone. And I would go out and, I mean, my dad had a few of these recorders left that had been used by himself and his brother. And he had a few of them lying around the house, and they didn't have that long a lifespan left, but I used one of them anyway and started my first few bird sound recordings. And when that gave in, I kind of gave up for a while. And then a few years later, I got myself I went through 2 Panasonic portable recorders with a condenser microphone. Not the most sensitive thing out there, but it was something. It was during my mid to late teen years, maybe early 20s. I was recording bird sounds on and off on tapes and that. And then I found in the early 2000s, I found another one of these portable tape recorders that my dad had, and I used to put there's this tape recorder on the on position in my backpack and walk around with the microphone clipped to my shirt in the off position, because you could turn the machine on and off on the microphone switch. So if I heard a bird sound, I would just flick the switch on and get some calls, and then edit them with another tape recorder, wire to wire, almost like a double tape deck thing. When I got home, and I'd edit them and just chop off the beginning and end microphone noise and all that kind of stuff. And when that tape recorder finally packed in, that was it for a while, until a few years ago when I acquired my first Olympus digital recorder. And since then, I've been at it. Or whenever I get the opportunity, I do record sounds, and I have also a Boya directional microphone with the windshield, aka Dead Cat. And I go out and record bird sounds whenever I can, and thoroughly enjoy it. What I like doing is having my own version of the bird call, partly because I like to record different sound types that Lynette was mentioning, songs and calls and alarm calls, all separately, and keep them in separate files, but the same folder, the same species folder, but I've got separate recordings for each sound type of each species. And my recording collection's ever growing. Always add to it. Can never have too little or too much. And one of the reasons I do it as well is for geographical variation in bird sounds. For example, the blackback puffback is something that sounds completely different down here from what it does further north. And even some of my clients, I say, "What's that?" And they say, "Well, you don't know." I say, "It's a blackback puffback." And they say, "No way, can't be." I say, "Well, it is. Have a look." And we look for it, and we see it. And they're surprised that birds like that can sound so different down here from what they do further north.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That was very good. If you're in the Port Alfred area, book a tour with Tim. He's a very good bird guide. Okay, now we will introduce Etienne. Are you ready to speak? Etienne?
Yes, I think I'm ready, almost.
Okay. Yeah, let me first introduce you. Etienne is also a bird guide. He takes people around Southern Africa, Zim, Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa. Very, very highly recommended. He's an absolute expert in IDing LBJs, like warblers, like the Upchur's warbler. That's a long story, but we won't have time to go into that. And he's also brilliant at IDing birds by sound. And he will tell you all about that. So over to you, Etienne.
Thanks, Lynette, and thanks for the great talk so far. I really enjoyed it, I must say. I'm going to share my screen. I managed to put together a presentation in the last 20 minutes or so, since my computer blew up while I was out this afternoon looking for Tinkling Cisticola in the rainy de Tweedespreid. But here we are. Let's share some ideas. You know, sound is, to me, sound is the universe of birds. It takes one into the world of the birds around us. But I'd like to share my screen, and I'm going to go there. And sorry, I'm going to go. Where am I going? Just find the right presentation. Is that the one? How does that look? Can you see that presentation?
Looks fine.
Sorry?
Looks fine, Etienne.
Is that fine? So, yeah, what I'm going to go through is just some thoughts on sound and where I started. I was very fortunate enough at the age of 7 to be introduced by my parents when I became interested in birds to Dr. Guy Berry, who was a leading light in the Wits Bird Club way back in the 1960s. And on the very first outing, he said to me, "Young man, this is not bird watching. We don't do bird watching, we do birding, because most of it is listening." And that was a very important lesson. My favorite bird in the early days was, I think the most important bird sound in my life has been the melodious lark, although I only encountered it late in my 20s. But for me, sound has always been something that brings tremendous connection with the emotions, connections with one's history, and connections with our past. So in many ways, sound is what connects us to who we really are. And that's why sound is so profound, as something that we love and we cherish and that we listen to all the time. Just an example would be that whenever I hear Cape Canary singing in the tops of the trees, I'm taken back to my youth and my childhood on the family farm in East Griqualand. It literally brings back the smells of the cattle pens and the kikuyu grass. All those things are associated in my mind. But melodious lark played a special role in my development, I think, as a better birder. In the sense that I found the melodious lark when I was living in Pretoria in Moreletta Park in about 97. I found a flock of melodious larks in a small grassland where the Pretoria East Hospital is these days. And I posted something on SA BirdNet, which was the email forum way back. And I said, yes, a melodious lark's really exciting. Anybody wants information, please contact me. And I got a phone call, I think that same day, from a young man who introduced himself. He was still at school. And he said to me, "Mr. Marais, my name is Francie Peacock. I wonder if you would do me a huge favor and show me the melodious lark. It's a life for me and my friend Bernard." So that was really where I met Francie. And I think, honestly, in the early years, I was perhaps his mentor, and he became a mentor to me later on in terms of a shared experience of what sound is all about and how much one can learn in sound. So one of the challenges I think that I've encountered later on in life is just the notion of stepping up. What can the mind really do with sound? How good can one be at remembering individual calls? And I'm going to come back to that a little bit. But just to play something else here, this is off Zeno Cantor, the most amazing resource. And it is the sound of the dawn call of the cinnamon-breasted warbler on a remote koppie in the vast Karoo of southern Africa. And it brings a couple of things to mind.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you shared your screen without.
Is that good? So this is one of the most incredible sounds I was talking about in southern Africa, and possibly in the world. on a remote kopje in the Karoo, the incredible, mournful and beautiful call of cinnamon-breasted warblers at dawn. And it brings to me a couple of things to the fore. One, as I was saying, just the connection with the emotions that sound brings. But secondly, I think this is a sound that very few birders will hear because we're too driven to see birds and to tick them. And therefore, we never just go and sit and wait for the birds to do their own thing. We want to prompt them to do things on our agenda. And yet we call ourselves environmentalists and nature lovers. So it's something I'm going to be dealing with in a webinar coming up under the auspices of BirdLife South Africa's Learn About Birds program, when we look at really what is birding ethics in relation to sounds. And that is, sorry, just to play it again, the sound of the melodious laugh, one of the most incredible mimicked, with the most phenomenal range and ability to mimic so many species. And just a fascinating topic all on itself, all on its own. I think we've got both of these going now. I'm going to move on. And go back to my probably most interesting sound experience I've had. On the 3rd of March 2017, I was here on this deck overlooking the ocean and trying to finish a Sabap 2 Atlas card. Late in the afternoon, we'd been out in the woodlands looking for green tinkerbirds. And I was on this deck and I was birding, looking for some extra birds to add. And lo and behold, I became aware of some swifts flying above. And they were wheeling around in the evening light. And I thought, these are common swifts. And then I thought, but there's something strange about these swifts. They don't really make sense to me. There's something about them. At one stage, I thought I saw a little swift because of the big throat patch, but then in fact, it wasn't a little swift. And so at the last moment, unable to get any of my birding group to come and try and photograph these swifts, I grabbed my little voice recorder, and that's all it is. An Olympus WS853. I held it in the air, and I made a small recording, which was 40 seconds, 2017, and then nothing happened until COVID and lockdown in March last year. And I got to talk to Gary Allport about knock-mig and recording birds, nocturnal migration, and set up a recorder outside. And in the process of this discussion, we got on to perhaps there's some new birds to be added to the Mozambique list. And Gary mentioned that there'd been comment that perhaps Forbes Watson Swift might come south into Mozambique. And the result was first a frantic search for the sound recording, and then a very interesting process of trying to establish what the sound recording was in fact of. So what we found is that it was most like Forbes Watson Swift. And if you look at the different sonograms, this is a sonogram analysis, very easy to do for anybody using Audacity. But this is the characteristic shape of Forbes Watson Swift, which is rather a flat sound, and for a swift, it's rather low-pitched, below 4 kilohertz. It sounds low and mellow to the ear, and it spans a relative small frequency range. And then at the end, there's a final bit of pulse of energy, and there's a decline in the pitch at the end of that. If you compare it to African Black Swift, it's much higher up in the range, close to 6, and it's got more of an undulating trill, and then it drops more radically. And if you look at a couple of other swifts, like Common Swift, which is a very N shape, it goes up very fast and comes down very fast. There are all these differences you can see on the sonogram. So what we embarked on, my friend and colleague Gary Allport, together with my good friend Fancy Peacock, was an in-depth process to try and prove what these swifts were that I'd recorded in Esaural in Mozambique. And this ended up being quite an elaborate process of analysing the swifts of all the calls of all the possible candidate swifts that you could get. And I think you can see there right on the left, Inosaural was my swift, the one I recorded, those Forbes Watson, and just the pitch is right down there. The nearest is Nyanza, which however has a very different structure, and all the other swifts are way higher than that. In terms of statistical analysis, we collected a number of samples of screams of all the swifts, and we analyzed all of those using special software, and we were able to show statistically that the Inusaurus swift was undoubtedly a Forbes-Watson swift, which of course is a great discovery given that the known range of Forbes-Watson swift is essentially Yemen, Oman, the breeding populations on Socotra, and then mostly in Somalia. And then they migrate in the southern summer down into Tanzania and Kenya. Most records being in Kenya, around Kilifi, some records further south. And this is way down here in Isoro in Mozambique. So it's been very heartwarming or rewarding to actually finally be able to publish this paper. I think it's the first species added to the Southern African list, entirely on the basis of sound analysis, and it's available in the bulletin of the British Ornithologists Club, which has come out. That is online and freely available at no charge. And here's the Forbes-Watson swift, which is now on the agenda of birders in Southern Africa, and one should be looking out for them on the coast of Mozambique near forests in February and March. Fancy, of course, came to the party with a beautiful illustration comparing particular Forbes-Watson swift with Apis pekinensis, the far eastern race of common swift. So just in terms of concluding comments on sound, I would just like to say that one needs to go beyond commercial products in sound. I think Lynette has mentioned Xenocanto. And if I can make give a further reason for that, I think a lot of the commercial products were made using playback as the sort of modus operandi. So most of the calls on roberts are very aggressive. The birds are playing specific aggressive role, and they're taken by the birds that you want to see as aggressive and have negative impacts as because that's what you're playing. You're playing in an aggressive call. So for me, sound is not like vision in the sense that it has no direction. Vision, we focus. Sound, we don't focus. Sound is just around us. It's part of our environment. And the beauty of sound is that if you are prepared for something, it can come out of the blue at you, and all of a sudden you hear something, be it with Madagascar cuckoo and centurion, you'll just pick it up, you'll notice it because it stands out. You don't actually have to be birding for sound to intrude into your world. Then to me, the great wonder of sound that I think one has to celebrate is, let's not just think about sound as a way of identifying birds. Let's go beyond that and say it's one of the wonders of experiencing birds in their lives. And that is that these are incredible performances. The sound of the cloud Cisticola right up, they're literally in the clouds with incredible energy all day long over most of the South African highveld. And sound really takes you into the bird world. For me, the greatest joy is to go into an environment and just listen. And there's so much more going on that you can see. Even if you're the most incredibly sharp bird and you can spot like crazy, you just cannot have the same sense of what the reality is around you that you can with sound. And a common theme, and something I'm talking about a lot more these days, is that it's time to reflect on the impact of birders, and particularly playing sounds, spishing, playing pearl-spotted owl calls, and all the things that we do. And I think in line with that, we need to step up and we need to start paying more attention to trying to understand what are the birds actually communicating? What is the difference between a contact call and an alarm call? What are the different songs? What do they mean? Are they territorial songs? Are they mating songs? And what is the impact on other birds of those specific songs? So thank you very much for Lynette, for this opportunity. It's really just the tip of the iceberg as far as I'm concerned. There's so much more to talk about. That's what I do. I'm Etienne Marais birding. I try and do ethical birding in Southern Africa and beyond. I do day trips, I do tours around the region, and I do courses. I've just come off the third warbler field course. This is a fantastic time of the year in March for Palearctic warblers, something I've been doing for 15 years. And just this morning, I was out on the Gomo floodplain near there, having the incredible experience of listening to marsh warblers, European marsh warblers, as they prepare for the breeding season in northern Europe or wherever they're going. And they're preparing by practicing their songs. And part of practicing their songs is mimicking. but these warblers are in South Africa, so they're mimicking a whole host of South African species: acacia-pied, barbet, white-throat, robin-chats, brown-crowned tchagrers, even other warblers, river warbler and willow warbler. It's just the most remarkable experience. So I'd love to see you all in the field, and thank you for the webinar. Cheers.
Sorry, Lynette, I wasn't expecting you to be on mute.
Thank you. I was gagged. I couldn't talk. Okay, now we will introduce Rick Nutall, a brilliant bird guide as well. As I said, he also does nature adventures as well as birding. Rick is very passionate about bird calls and bird call recording, and he organized a bird call recording weekend in the Northern Cape recently, and Tim and I went, and it was so worthwhile. It's brilliant, and I will definitely go again. Rick's going to be talking to us about the most fascinating topic, mimicry in birds. Why do birds mimic? Okay, over to you, Rick.
Thanks very much, Lynette. I know that we've gone a little over our allotted time for this webinar. Derek, are we still okay to just keep going?
It seems like we still have a fair number of people around, and it's obviously very interesting to everyone. So I'm happy to stick around and keep it going.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'll share my screen. Did you see my slide?
Yes, yes, working well.
Okay, I just want to move this. Right, good evening, everybody, and thank you for a fascinating presentation so far. I really like the kind of things that Etienne is saying, and I'm thrilled that BirdLife South Africa has introduced being able to add birds to our South African bird lists by sound without seeing birds. I think that's a very, very good move. That's not what we're here to discuss. I'm going to, as quickly as I can, just have a look at vocal mimicry in birds. And as Lynette said, it's a fascinating topic, something that has fascinated me for many, many years. I started birding as a young kid, as did Tim and Etienne and Lynette. And I think one thing that the four of us who presented this evening have in common is that we all have a very close affiliation with the Eastern Cape. And this is a photograph showing the Albany thicket or valley bushveld habitat that is so prevalent down in the Eastern Cape. Firstly, what is mimicry? This is a very common garden bird, particularly here in the central parts of South Africa and heading up further north, more on the Highveld. This is the Karoo thrush, and mimicry essentially is where a bird incorporates vocalizations of other species and or other sounds into its own vocal repertoire. So that's a very simplistic definition of vocal mimicry or vocal imitation. And it's got to the stage these days that in urban areas, many species that live in these areas are actually incorporating some interesting inorganic sounds, should I say, anthropomorphic sounds, man-made sounds into their repertoire, such as this. I'm not sure if this sound is going to come through. Can you hear that? A car alarm? Is that, can you hear that, Derek?
Yeah, it's coming through loud and clear.
Okay, good. Either car alarms or, can you believe it, ringtones of cell phones and smartphones. And this Karoo thrush in a tiny little pocket handkerchief-sized garden that we used to have in central Bloemfontein. One day I noticed that our local bird was incorporating the regular old cell phone ringtone into its song. So that was quite interesting. So it's happening all around us, and I wonder how many people are actually aware of the fact that good numbers of species do in fact imitate other sounds and copy sounds. Now, why do they do this? Why would birds do this? Well, the reason, there's still many questions that are unanswered, mainly because this is a relatively a new area of research, and there's not that much data available to come up with answers to this. But it's known that many male songbirds sing for two main reasons, and that is firstly to attract females, to attract mates, and then to repel rivals. Many songbirds are very territorial, and of course it's very competitive out there, and being able to embellish, as Lynette said, their songs would perhaps allow them to be more effective in attracting females and repelling rivals. And it's been shown, however, that in many species, females seem to prefer males that have got these larger repertoires, more varied repertoires. So a male that can incorporate other sounds into its song to increase his repertoire may well be in a better position to attract females than one that is not able to do that or do it as effectively. Which species mimic? Well, it's quite a broad range. The latest research, it's in fact the only research that I'm aware of, was done some time ago, and we really need to update this, showed that up to 66, at least 66 species of passerines or songbirds in southern Africa are known to mimic. What groups do these birds belong to? Well, anybody who knows anything about mimicry and copying and vocal imitation will know that the robin chats, the larks, and the warblers, warblers incorporating things like the parasomas, the tit babblers, as well as things like the eremomulars, the silvered warblers, are all very accomplished mimics. And in fact, research that has been done, Etienne mentioned the marsh warblers that are incorporating sounds of birds from their non-breeding grounds, in other words, southern African species, into their songs as they prepare to head back north to breed in the Palearctic area. And now much research has been done on species such as the Palearctic marsh warbler. We have our own African reed warbler. That's the picture shown bottom right. Just to show the pictures, chorister robin-chat, top left, rufous-naped lark, which is not an accomplished, but it does mimic. Capped wheatear, one of the chat family, is an accomplished mimic. And so those are the ones that we'd perhaps expect more. But there are a whole host of others. The shrikes, he has a common fiscal. Canaries, he has a yellow canary. White eyes are very accomplished mimics. Sunbirds, a number of sunbird species mimic others. And then the parasitic viduids, the widers and indigo birds are also known to mimic. And I'll touch on that in a while.
Sorry, Rick, but we're still stuck on your Karoo thrush.
Oh, I wonder how that's happening.
I think maybe you should just, because of the time, I think it would be probably just best to just keep talking as if we could see your slides,
Okay.
but we may not be able to.
Should I not just unshare and then share again?
We can try.
Okay, I'll just try that. If you can just let me know if there's any change.
Yeah, we've got the four birds upper right.
Okay.
One being the
Chorister robin-chat top
lark,
left.
I think. Yeah.
And the rufous-napped lark top right. Yeah, capped wheatear and the reed warbler. Okay, I don't seem to be able to advance my slides now. Should I just keep talking? Let me just keep talking.
Yeah, I think so. Just
yeah, what I'd like to do is just use a few examples of experiences that I've had that have really brought mimicry home to me, vocal mimicry in birds. And the first of these was when I was still at school in Grahamstown in the Eastern Cape, and I woke up one morning to hear a hen and well, maybe somebody's hen and chickens has have escaped from their coop and they're outside. I looked out the window and there was a common starling sitting on the power line outside, and it was mimicking perfectly the clucking of a hen and the chirping of her chicks. So that was my introduction to this wonderful phenomenon of vocal imitation or mimicry in birds. And it begged the question, where has this starling been that it has picked this up? Because it's learning must take place for birds to incorporate these other sounds into their repertoire. And many birds learn when they are very young, and some do not continue learning when they're adults, so they're kind of fixed into what they learn. But there are also many species that learn continuously. So many adult birds will come, and those who are mimics will go from season to season, year to year, and they'll incorporate new sounds into their repertoire as time goes on. The second the second experience that I had of vocal mimicry was to do with the chorister robin-chat. And I spent time as a university student helping out with a research project in the beautiful indigenous forests around the Eastern Cape town of Stutterheim, close to Hogsback. And I heard this beautiful, pretty Georgie, beautiful melodious whistled sound during my time working on this research project. And I found the bird that was singing that, and it was a chorister robin-chat. So my first identification of a chorister robin-chat by sound was based on this beautiful song that it was singing. And it was only later that I discovered that it was in fact a mimicked song of the African emerald cuckoo, a migrant cuckoo, an intra-African migrant that comes down to South Africa during the summer months. And of course, being a cuckoo, it's a brood parasite. So I had incorrectly identified the call of the song of the chorister robin-chat based on a species that it mimicked. So that was another fascinating introduction to me to this phenomenon. And I have spent many a happy hour in the forest habitats of chorister robin-chats, spending time with this species, whistling to it, and just getting to know this species and its vocal repertoire, and learning to understand what the different things mean, the different aspects of its vocal repertoire mean. So that rather strange experience that I had in the beginning has brought me much closer to the chorister robin-chat, and it's one of the species I really enjoy. The third incident or experience that I did field work at a nature reserve called Sandveld Nature Reserve. It's around the Bloemhof Dam in the Western Free State. And in the savanna type habitat that occurs there, not only the Sabota lark occurs, but there are 3 other species that all are quite accomplished vocal mimics. And the other species being the Kalahari scrub robin, the chestnut-vented tit babbler, or warbler as it's now known, and the fawn-colored lark. So I spent time doing research on estrilded finches. That was my main research project at the time, but I was able to really study the ins and outs of the vocal repertoires of these 4 species: Sabota lark, Kalahari scrub robin, chestnut-vented tit babbler, and the fawn-colored lark. And to learn to distinguish between these 4 species, but in particular, I was able to study the Sabota lark's mimicry. And one particular December, it was in 1992, on one day when I was there, I found a singing male Sabota lark. It was about 3 or 4 kilometers from the Bloemhof Dam, from the shoreline of the Bloemhof Dam in the savannah. And I managed to do a sound recording of this bird while it was singing. And the 10-minute segment that I recorded, I then analyzed, and I was astonished to discover 49 different species of birds being mimicked by this one individual in a 10-minute time period. Not only were there 49 different species of birds that were being mimicked, but I counted at least 59 different vocalizations. So certain species, perhaps it was a snippet of the song and a snippet of their contact calls that were being that was being mimicked by this individual Sabota. One fascinating thing was that this bird, as I said, it was 3 or 4 kilometers from the closest water. It was incorporating a number of water-associated species such as blackwing stilt, 3-banded plover, what would it have been? I think wood sandpiper. There were a number of water-associated species that it was incorporating into its vocal repertoire, in its song. Now, that begs the question, how is this bird learning those songs of those species? They don't occur in the area. Well, it might have been picking up these birds as they flew overhead, but another possibility was that this was a good example of cultural transmission of learning, and that the birds whose territories were right down at the dam, near the shoreline of the dam, were in fact encountering these water-associated species regularly, and they were learning their sounds, incorporating those into their songs, and they were then, those songs of those Sabota larks down near the water were then being transferred via their neighbors across a number of territories inland, so to speak, and that's how the Sabota lark that was nowhere near the water was picking up these water-associated sounds. So just another very, very, very interesting aspect. Etienne has alluded to the melodious lark and what a wonderful mimic this is. I do have some sound recordings. I don't know if they, if the sounds will come across. Derek, can you perhaps hear that?
I can't.
You can't hear it?
No, let me turn my volume up. No, I'm not hearing it. I wonder if you didn't share your screen without sharing your computer sound.
I did share sound, but I'm just, yeah, maybe there's a problem with mine too. Oh, okay. Okay, this is the mimicry, or the song of a melodious lark with just mimicry, European bee-eaters. You can hear European bee-eaters being mimicked. Cloud cisticolas being mimicked. You name it. Okay, and oh, there we go. Now I'm going through my slides. this is the, if you can see this now, this is the melodious lark, a bird in display and one down on the ground. It's amazing what one can hear. This bird has the most amazing vocal repertoire, and what's fascinating too is that it seems to mimic groups of species, such as swallows and martins together, and then seed-eating birds together, widows and quilias and quailfinch and things like that. And this is something that was found by Fancy Peacock in his study that he did, that Etienne introduced him to as well. So there's so much fascinating information, and I would love to, get to grips on why these birds are doing this. But the central grasslands, or the grasslands of the Highveld during summertime after good rains, are just filled with displaying melodious larks. And I agree with what Etienne said. I don't need to necessarily see these birds. I know they're up there, but just to be able to hear them is just one of the most amazing experiences that one can have as a birder. What's also interesting is that neighboring territorial males will often song match. So they will be mimicking the same species in their songs at the same time. And so it seems to go through the different territories. Here's this bird mimicking African quailfinch perfectly, both male and female, as well as flight calls. It's just quite remarkable. I'm not quite sure how I can turn this off now. So we'll just have to have it as background. So that was the fourth experience. And then another experience that I've had has been right in my backyard, and that's with the very endearing Cape Robin chats. Cape Robin chats are present in most of our gardens, particularly in urban areas. And I've just picked up that the Cape Robin chats, particularly here in Bloemfontein, when I became aware of this, they really incorporate a lot of mimicry into their songs. And what's been interesting for me is that looking at different territories, or being aware of different territorial birds, it's interesting that to know how the sounds will be transferred, if they'll be transferred from father to son, when youngsters are being raised, and there's this learning process going on. The adult birds are learning on an ongoing basis, because a territorial bird in my garden will incorporate new sounds as time goes on. And then all of a sudden you hear a sound of a species that doesn't occur in the area. So one is assuming then that bird has moved out. Perhaps it's a seasonal movement that we're not aware of, and it's moved out into other areas where it's picked up different species and it's incorporated those into its song. So just fascinating, actually, being able to record different territorial Cape Robin chats, and then to try and look at what is actually happening in the transfer of those song elements between individuals, between generations, and the like. And then I want to just finish off by mentioning the fascinating relationship between the brood parasite widers and indigo birds and their host species, the estrilded finches. That's a whole story on its own, the whole brood parasitism story. But what's very interesting is that one of the consequences of this breeding strategy is the fact that young widers, indigo birds, are raised together with the young estrilded finch of the host, the young chicks. They aren't thrown out of the nest like cuckoos do, many of the cuckoos, most in fact. And so what's happening is that the young birds, the young widers, let's just use that as an example. We use the example of a shaft-tailed wider, because they parasitize violet-eared waxbills. So young shaft-tailed widers will be hearing the sounds, the songs, and the vocalizations, other vocalizations of their violet-eared waxbill host parents, and they will then be incorporating those vocalizations into their vocal repertoire. And when the male shaft-tailed widers start singing, they have their own innate vocalizations that are shaft-tailed wider vocalizations, but they also incorporate song phrases and call and flight call of the violet-eared waxbill into their own songs. So it's very, very interesting, because then the male shaft-tailed wider, which normally sits on the top of a tree and sings its heart out, what it's doing is it's trying to attract females that it can mate with. And those females, because they've also been reared in the nest of the violet-eared waxbill, they will be tuning in to the violet-eared waxbill vocalizations that are incorporated into the song of the male shaft-tailed wider. So it's very important in the intra-specific, inter-individual recognition for shaft-tailed widers. So the wider females are recognizing that violet-eared waxbill set of vocalizations to find not only suitable males, but suitable and appropriate hosts. In other words, they listen out for other violet-eared waxbills, and they will be looking out for nesting opportunities when the time is right for them to lay their eggs in the nests of or the nest of a violet-eared waxbill. So it's a very, very, very interesting, very specific relationship between the brood parasite and the host, not from a breeding perspective, but from a vocal perspective as well. I was hoping to be able to show, this is just a picture, if you can see it, of the shaft-tailed wider, the male, and the violet-eared waxbill host. Another just very interesting thing, Derek, can you see my screen, my slides?
Yes, I can see the cuckoo and the
tit babbler.
Tit babbler, yeah.
The chestnut-vented warbler. I wonder how many birders have noticed that they might be hearing Diedrich cuckoos before the cuckoos are actually arriving in summer. And what is happening, and this has been mentioned by a number of people in different parts of the country, is that the chestnut-vented tit babblers start incorporating the Diedrich calls, song phrase, into their own song, and mimicking this in a repetitive manner long before the Diedrichs are actually arriving. Now, that's a fact. What we don't know is why they're doing it. One would assume that Diedrichs would parasitize chestnut-vented warblers. Maybe they're doing it to just try and warn off any early arriving Diedrichs. But it's a fascinating phenomenon and something that I think really merits looking into. So that's just another fascinating story about vocal mimicry. And then another one that there's been some good research done on this, where the alarm calls of fork-tailed drongos have been shown what they do, they mimic the alarm calls of the Stokstad meerkat, the suricate, and studies have shown this. And what they do is the drongos follow foraging groups of surricates in their arid zone habitats. And these drongos are incredibly good at mimicking the alarm calls of the surricates. And when the surricates are all up and looking around, the drongo swoops in and gets itself a tasty morsel. And the timing of it uttering those alarm calls is perfectly done to be timed exactly when one of the surricates has found a tasty morsel. So it's found a bug or a cricket or something. The drongo sees this, it gives the surrogate alarm call, and they all stop dead in their tracks, or they scatter, and the drongo goes down and helps himself to a free meal. So that's just a much more highly evolved system of deception that is taking place. But the fork-tailed drongo is doing this and doing it to deceive the surrogate. So it takes mimicry to another level. It's not mimicking another bird, but it's mimicking a mammal. And it has a very, very important function in doing so. So fascinating. Thanks. I've gone through this very quickly. I would have loved to have played some more of the calls, so that that we could look at that, and also how we identify the different species that are being mimicked. But possibly this will be a topic for a future presentation. And I hope that I've just opened up your ears a little bit, perhaps, to this fascinating phenomenon of vocal mimicry in birds. And hopefully when you're out there and listening to your local common fiscal singing away, you'll just be a little bit more aware, because you might hear the sound of a helmeted guinea fowl, or a quail finch, or your local flock of speckled mouse birds, coming all from the same spot. And yes, they're coming from that common fiscal, because he's incorporating those sounds into his own song. Yes, I do run tours and nature adventures. Particularly, I'm fascinated by butterflies and dragonflies, and love to just share experiences, that those wonderful experiences that nature provides for us. And sound is a critically important part of that. And I think that's one of the key things that I like to do as well, is to share soundscapes and an appreciation of the sounds of nature with other like-minded people. Thank you very much, Lynette. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. And Derek and Etienne from Learn the Birds, thank you for this tremendous platform that we can all be a part of, and that we can all join in with. Thanks so much.
Rick, before I hand you back to Lynette, I just want to take you up on that. I think it would be really good to have something on more detail on mimicry later in the year. So let's talk about it.
Great. Excellent. Thank you.
Lynette, over to you for concluding remarks.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rick. That was absolutely fascinating. And as Derek said, that's a topic of its own. I think we need to do a webinar on mimicry and go really in depth, and it'll be great if you lead it.
Yeah, and we could look at the analysis and looking at it on sonograms and using Audacity, and
exactly.
and how we can identify and name the different species. I think that'd be great fun.
Yes,
and I think bringing in some of the natural selection aspects of it would be amazing, because we always think about the visual world of birds and how males and females become different because of the, sorry, Lynette, I'm disturbing you there, but I think this is an important one to bring in. The sexual selection by female choice is an important aspect of the life of birds, and it is as much a part of their auditory world as it is the visual world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fascinating.
Okay, sorry, Derek. I was going to do a bit about geographical variation, but I think we've run out of time. We're losing some of our members, but that can be a topic for another webinar one day. But,
yes, no, let's do it.
Yeah, just to conclude, I hope everyone watching is now inspired to learn more bird calls and to improve their auditory birding skills. And it really does enrich your birding experience if you can identify birds by call and not only visually. It really does enrich your experience. You're so much more aware of which birds are around before you even see them. So I hope it's inspired everybody. Now I think that we can wrap up now.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Lynette. Thanks, Etienne. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Rick. Really
Thanks very
excellent,
much.
excellent evening, and hopefully we'll see some of you tomorrow in the amazing presentation that's going to be about our sociable weavers and the interactions that happen between and among sociable weavers in their colonies. I think that's going to be something really interesting as well. And then, of course, next week we have one more presentation in the month of March, which is dedicated to women in birding and ornithology. So do check back at our website and see what's coming up. And I promise you tomorrow you won't be disappointed. So thanks again, everybody, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Lynette.
Pleasure.